We think the more control we have, the better parents will be. Control feels like protection. Structure feels like love. But here's the truth. Control might keep a teen compliant, but it doesn't make them trust you. It often does the opposite. When we parent from control, what we're really managing isn't our teen, it's our fear. Fear of losing influence, fear of watching them make choices we can't undo, fear of what it means about us if they start to fall apart. And that's what this talk is about. We're going to look at the 5 ways parents, often without realizing it, chip away at their teens' trust, and how to turn those moments into opportunities for repair instead of rupture. Because you can't parent a teen who doesn't trust you. They'll still live in your house, still answer your texts, still show up at dinner, but the part of them that chooses to let you in, the part that believes you can handle the truth, that's the part that disappears when trust is gone. So let's name it. When trust breaks, you lose 3 things. First, you lose honesty. Teens stop sharing what's real because it doesn't feel safe. Number 2, you lose influence because your voice starts sounding like static. And number 3, you lose access. They'll still engage around logistics, rides, meals, permission slips, but the emotional relationship becomes off limits. And you may not notice it right away because teens can keep up the performance of connection for a while. They can say, "I'm fine." They can laugh at dinner. They can do what you ask. But that doesn't mean trust is there. Trust isn't about compliance, it's about safety. It's about whether they believe you'll hold what's real without using it against them. Now, before we go on to mistake 1, let's zoom out for a second. From a developmental standpoint, the teen brain is designed for independence. The limbic system, the emotional brain, develops years before the prefrontal cortex, which handles reasoning and impulse control. That means your teen's drive for autonomy turns on before their capacity for full self-regulation does. So when you tighten control to protect them, you're working against their biology. Their brain experiences control as a threat to autonomy, and threat always triggers defensiveness. That's not disrespect, it's just biology. When we can understand that, it changes the frame from my teens being defiant to my teens trying to feel in control of themselves. And if we want them to trust us, we have to make space for that process. Let me tell you about a mom I'll call Lisa and her son Evan, who is 16. Lisa was the kind of parent everyone saw as on top of it. She kept track of homework deadlines, had parent-teacher conferences on speed dial, made sure he was in advanced classes. Her intentions were pure. She wanted to give him every opportunity she never had. But Evan had started to shut down. He used to tell her about his friends, about what he was working on in art class. Lately, though, the conversations had become one-word answers. And Lisa said to me, "He's so disrespectful now, he used to care." When I asked for examples, she said, "Well, he rolls his eyes. He says, 'Okay, fine.' He acts like everything I say is stupid." So I asked her, "When he rolls his eyes, what's happening right before that?" She thought for a minute. And she said, "Well, usually I'm telling him he should do better or reminding him that he's capable of more." And so here's the thing. She thought she was showing belief in him. He experienced it as nothing is enough. So I asked, "Lisa, what do you think he's protecting when he shuts down?" And that question changed everything. Because the truth is, Evan wasn't trying to disrespect his mom. He was protecting the effort he had made. His mom's words, "I believe in you, you're capable of more," were received as pressure, not encouragement. She thought his silence was defiance, but it was self-preservation. When Lisa softened her corrections and replaced them with curiosity by saying things like, "You seem like something's weighing on you today. Want to tell me about it?" Evan started talking again, not immediately, not consistently, but enough that she realized trust doesn't get rebuilt through control. It got rebuilt through her restraint. If you've ever thought, "I just want them to respect me," type respect in the chat because We're about to unpack how we confuse respect with obedience and why that confusion quietly destroys trust. So let's start with one of the most common ways that control sneaks in: the belief that respect means obedience. Most of us grew up in homes where compliance was the standard for respect, but with teens, that's where things quietly start to fracture. Respect and obedience are not the same thing. But for many of us, especially if you grew up in a generation where talking back wasn't tolerated, they can feel interchangeable. We learned that respect meant compliance. You don't question, you don't challenge, you just do what you're told. So when your teen doesn't comply, it feels disrespectful. But that's an emotional echo from our own upbringing, not a reliable measure of respect today. Let me make this practical for you. Obedience is about behavior, whether they do what you want. Respect is about relationship, whether they still value your humanity even when they don't agree with you. When you conflate the two, you start measuring trust by how quickly your teen agrees with you. And that's the fastest way to actually lose their trust. Now, in terms of why parents fall into this trap, it's not because you're authoritarian. It's because obedience gives a temporary sense of security. When your teen does what you ask, it calms your anxiety. It feels like proof that you're still relevant, that you haven't lost them. But if you pay attention closely, the calm doesn't last, because control is not connection. It's the illusion of it. The teen complies, but internally they're withdrawing. And because they can't both be authentic and obedient in that moment, they start choosing self-protection over openness. That's the moment trust starts to erode, not when they roll their eyes or argue, but when they stop showing you who they really are. From a teen's point of view, respect isn't about tone or hierarchy. It's about mutual recognition. It's about whether they feel their inner world matters to you, even when it's inconvenient. When they say, "You don't respect me," what they often mean is, "You don't see me as having my own mind." And you know what? They're right, because adolescence is that phase where their mind is forming. Their emerging sense of self is fragile, like wet cement. Every correction, every debate about what's right leaves an impression. So when parents confuse obedience with respect, they're essentially saying, "I'll respect you once you agree with me." That's conditional respect, and conditional respect can't build trust. So let's talk about David and his 15-year-old daughter, Sophie. David prided himself on being a rational dad. He listened, but he also corrected. When Sophie said she hated school, he'd respond, "You don't actually hate it. You just don't like the work." When she said she was stressed, he'd say, "Everyone's stressed. That's life." He wasn't trying to shut her down. He thought he was helping her build perspective. But to Sophie, it felt like nothing she said was valid unless he agreed. So she started editing herself. She'd tell him what she thought he wanted to hear to avoid another argument. When I met with David, he said, "I don't understand. I've done everything right. I'm logical. I'm calm. I listen." And yeah, he was. But he was listening to respond, not to understand. He equated being right with being respected. And in doing so, he lost the very thing that earns real respect, which is emotional humility. When he stopped debating and started reflecting back her feelings, like, "That sounds exhausting. I can see why you'd feel that way," something changed. Sophie didn't suddenly become compliant, but she started telling him the truth again, because she no longer had to perform agreement to earn space in the relationship. That's respect. Here's a rule worth keeping in your pocket. Respect isn't obedience, it's recognition. When your teen disagrees but still talks to you, that's respect. When they argue but come back an hour later to ask your opinion, that's respect. When they mess up but trust you enough to admit it, that's their respect. If you punish those moments because they don't look like compliance, you train them to hide instead of relate. And hiding kills trust faster than any argument ever could. So here's what we've covered in part one. Control feels like safety, but it's actually the seed of mistrust. Teens are wired for autonomy before regulation. They need to feel agency to mature. When parents confuse obedience with respect, they lose both influence and authenticity in the relationship. And respect is not about agreement, it's about recognition. When your teen feels recognized, they relax their defenses. When they feel managed, they build walls. And you can't build trust on a wall. Now, in the next part, we'll go deeper into how parents unintentionally dismiss or debate their teen's reality and why that's one of the most subtle but powerful ways trust gets broken. Because most of the time, it doesn't happen through big betrayals. It happens through 1,000 small moments where your teen feels unseen. And once they stop believing you can hold their truth, they'll stop giving it to you.